associated with the Greeks, because color question isn't here yet. Because the Persians were giving help to the Greeks also. So the Greeks were allowed to come in group, now we're talking about 525, to help with the Africans against the Persians. When the Persians were defeated, the Greeks decided not to go, because where they're going back to? They're now in the land of honey. So they're not going to leave honey to go back. They said to the, well, look now, you're weak, because you've been fighting the Persians so long. We're stronger than you, we're not going. And so the Greeks remain there. This is how they get to stay. But subsequently, from that time, by the way, to now, to this very day, only one African have ruled over Egypt. A man by the name of Naguib, Mohammed Naguib, born in Egypt of Sudanese parents, both mother and father, the one that Nasser them withdrew after he defeated Farouk. Now, but it was after the Greeks were defeated by the Romans, then the Romans came in, and then caused the Byzantium period.
And you're saying at that time Africa was in decline?
Oh, it's been in decline from the time the Persians came.
But that's my point. What was causing this decline?
It's like anything else. You get to a point where there's nothing else you feel that anyone else could offer. You got careless. And then people come in and take you up. You let people in. You train them about what you're doing, most of what you're doing. They become a fifth column within the system.
And they undermine.
And they undermine. We're about the only people who come 40 million or so in a nation within a nation that doesn't undermine. Because we have been co-opted so well. See, if the ancient Africans should have taken their books, their religious books, and brainwashed everybody in there, like the Africans are now brainwashed everywhere else. And then we would have supported the system against our interests. But they didn't do that. They could not, because at the time, they even called these people ignoble people, uncouth. And they went about to shall I say, civilize them. But the same people that civilized, Professor Clark used a term, the guests, they invited the guests and they became the dinner for the guests. And so, but this is the whole thing. We must understand, I think too, the culture of the African, you know, Gil, if you got a home, you got your wife, your family, and you have a certain behavior pattern that you don't mistreat little children, you don't do this and that, and someone comes in, knock down your wife, take over your house.
He's a dead man.
He's a dead man today. But in those days, you didn't know. You believed that when you saw that man, you saw a man who come in with the same moral values that you have. You have no other point of reference that this can be. You don't know that this man gonna rape your wife, because nobody rapes people in your place. You don't even have a word for rape. So when the man come in and rape your wife, you stand. You says, what kind of behavior is this? Do you see what I'm saying? So when the Africans saw the Asians and Europeans coming at that particular time, he knew that they had enough land. Even in the Jewish Bible, it says, the Torah, in the book of Genesis, the Jewish first book, that when the Hebrews came in, when Abraham and his family came in, they gave him some of the best land. It was a cultural thing. The same thing happened when Henry, the so-called navigator from Portugal, came in West Africa. They gave him land. When the Dutch and the Huguenots from France and so forth came down, they were given land in Monomotapa, now called South Africa. Given land. They were given, even women, they were shared because they needed women, these men.
Is there any record outside of Hannibal of Africans being aggressive on other soil to colonize? Yes. Or?
Yeah. Unfortunately, yes. Africans went all the way to the banks of the Ganges as fighters and carried into India. And that is where you get your Dravidians from. A group of people in India still called Dravidians, some of them in now Malay and so forth.
Which Africans were those?
A combination of Egyptians, Ethiopians, and Nubians. A combination force, because at the time, the three entities were one. There were times when you couldn't tell the difference between India, Egypt, and, Nubia, Egypt, and Ethiopia. They were ruled by when one pharaoh ruled in here, he ruled the entire the length of the Nile Valley.
When was this that they
This put us, it's claimed, some claim it's during the time of Hatshepsut, some claim it is during the time of Sesostris II. It all depends on which one. Now, those Africans had conquered all the way to India, and when they were forced out, by the way, It is because of them you have the golden calf. The worship of the goddess Hathor. Hathor was, even the Jews one time before Abraham worshipped the golden calf. They call it the golden calf in the Old Testament, book of Genesis, but it was not called the golden calf. It was called goddess, symbol of the goddess Hathor. They knew what it was and did not mention it as such. The Indians adopted Hathor. Then the virgin thing, the Horus child, and Hare Krishna, the Krishna group. The Christians adopted that symbol. Isis becoming pregnant by an immaculate conception, giving birth to her son Horus by a virgin birth. This story is there still at the temple of Horus at Edfu. You could see it written all over the walls. They adopted the obelisks. The obelisk was in memory of the penis of Horus when he was destroyed and cut up into 14 pieces.
Let's push this a little further about the character of the African. Professor Van Sertima, you mentioned that there were wars, some wars that took place between Africans and Native Americans in early history.
Well, I wouldn't define them as wars. There was, in the situation that I particularly mentioned of Kwarekua, there you have a settlement that was encroaching from that Kwarekua into parts of the Native American territory, and therefore a clash occurred. And we do have cases of both of them taking prisoners.
But was there an aggressive character to the African that came to this hemisphere?
We don't have any clear evidence of that. We do have trader types coming in the Mandingo period, and they were warrior types as well. They had to be, because they had to be extremely cautious moving through new and potentially hostile territory. But we do know that in the Olmec period, we do not have evidence of this. And I want to return to that period because lots of people are not aware of the enormity of the evidence. One of the things that startles me is that nobody has mentioned the terracottas, the clay sculptures of Africans. I have been twice recently to Mexico and looked. There are literally hundreds of these with African, not just the African features, but beards, textures of hair. You could see the evocation of the texture of hair, which is quite distinct from the Asiatic type coming across the Bering Straits to early America. The skeletal types one mentioned that Wierzyński has mentioned. And then last year, the Science Digest brought out something on me in September, its September issue, in which they asked an authority in Mexico about these stone heads, which I say have African features. And he said the reason why they look African, why they have broad noses and thick lips, is because the tools were blunt. Now that is one of the most ridiculous defenses I have heard from the establishment, because he actually went as far as to say, this is Michael Coe,
who is
author of a major book. He's the major authority in Mexico, ancient Mexico. He said that if they had sharpened the nose, if they had got thin noses, it would have broken off. And when you go and you look, you could put your fingers, the edges of the lips, even where they are very full lips, you could see the extraordinary skill. These are 3,000-year-old heads. They're done with fine tools, because close by you can see figures done in stone with a different type of nose, different types of lips, the Native American type. And I wanted to ask, when I was first told of this by Boyce Rensberger, who wrote the article, if you ask Coe if they use blunt tools to make these types, and they then sharpen their tools to make the native types.
Let me just intrude for a minute, gentlemen, and just go to our viewers for a minute and let you know that it is now almost the end of the hour, and as promised, we want to bring to you a full screen, as we call it, bibliography list of materials that you can go to for more information. From Dr. Ben, he recommends that you read The Destruction of Black Civilization by Chancellor Williams, African Origins of Civilization by Chek Diop, World's Great Men of Color by J.A. Rogers, and Black Men of the Nile and Family by Professor Ben Yekinen himself. Professor Clark recommends that you read African Glory by J.C. DeGraff Johnson, Capitalism and Slavery by Eric Williams, Before the Mayflower by Lerone Bennett, and Slave Trade and Slavery by John Henrik Clarke and Vincent Harding. And Professor Van Sertima recommends that you read Africa and the Discovery of America by